So I'm just going to scroll down. This PowerPoint I am going to post tomorrow, but I am going to post it with a little bit of an asterisk next to it saying, this is the PowerPoint. We talked about a lot of these slides. However, we didn't cover all of them. If you were in class and you look at a slide and you're like, doesn't look familiar, just assume that we did not talk about it. If you're not confident in your assumptions, then email me and I can let you know. But I did put everything in there, and there's some slides we just didn't talk about. So, in terms of mortgages, first of all, everyone knows that there's a little T in there, right? Okay, just making sure. You don't want to go your whole life spelling it wrong, right? Yeah, that's what exactly. All right. So, first of all, how long? I should put you on mute, and anyone who has mortgages on mute. No. So how long is a typical mortgage?
30 years.
30 years. Am I correct to others? Yeah, it's about 30 years, which is a very long time to have a loan and have a commitment to something, right? What is, maybe you can help me out here, someone who's taken one out recently. I just took out a mortgage. The interest rate was 4.5%. Is that about average from what those of you have seen? Right about, yeah, 4.5% or so, which is not that high of a percentage if you're looking at like car loans. That's really not like drastic. But when you're talking about a house and you're talking about $100,000 or $200,000, that small interest rate can add up real quick, right? So we'll get into that today and how to make those calculations. But most mortgages are an installment loan. So all the math that we did last week with installment loans applies today. So we're not going to be learning really any new math per se. We're going to be revisiting what we did last week and applying it to mortgages, as well as some percentage basics that will be tied to mortgages as well. So I would jot down that it is an installment loan for the most part. It can differ from the definition of an installment loan, depending on the type of mortgage it is, but we'll get into that in a little bit. Any questions on any of that? Can you take out a mortgage for a shorter or longer time?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So oddly enough, six of us in my friend group have gotten houses in the last 2 years, and half of us have 30-year loans, and the other half have 20 or 25. So you can edit that based on whatever you want. Obviously, most people, to be able to make your mortgage only 20 years or 15 years or something crazy like that, obviously is a big financial commitment, but that's just something to consider. And you'll be able to consider that better once we're able to calculate those numbers today.
What's the minimum number? How low can you go, or depends on how much you can afford?
That is a question I've never been asked. Well, what's the lowest you can go in terms of years?
Yeah.
15 and 10? Yeah, I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't pay it off sooner, right? I have never thought about that before. I do know this though, so it depends on what kind of loan you've taken out or who the lender is. But I have seen prepaid fees. So what that means is if you pay off your loan far in advance, you have to pay a fee for it. So that's something to think about. It's an unfortunate thing. It's still probably the smart decision because that fee is probably less than the interest that would build up. It probably depends on the situation. But that's something you want to think about with, I think it's car loans as well. You just want to make sure that if you're going to pay it off earlier than scheduled, you don't have a fee that comes with it. And if you do, yeah, in my brain it's stupid too, but there's clearly some logic for it somewhere. I'm assuming it's because the bank or the lender is now making less money off of you, right? And they need to recoup some of that. Kind of like we talked about last class, one of their ways to recoup or make sure they're getting their money in a loan is amortization, right? Where in the beginning of the loan, you're paying a lot of interest. And then as the loan progresses through time, you pay more towards the actual principal or loan amount. So that's one thing they do to safeguard to make sure they get their money, but that's probably another. I can't say for sure, but so I think you could pay it off really whenever you want, most likely, but I might have to do some more research on that. Does that make sense? And you can make extra payments too. So like if you have a 30-year loan, but here and there you have enough money to make an extra payment or an additional payment, you can do that just like any other loan, which will end up lowering your interest. I think we did that last class, right? Where we pulled up the amortization schedule and we said, what if we make an extra payment of $150? What happens to the interest? Interest, if you make an additional payment, interest goes down, right? And the number of payments that you have goes down, right? So that's a similar situation. All right. So a couple of things. We already talked about this. So I always like to confirm that everyone knows that a mortgage is a loan for a home. That's what that first bullet means. Don't write it down word for word. That's literally what it means. All right. Now, something I want to talk about that is big with getting a mortgage. Oh, this is going to be the worst video. You're going to see my chest walking through. It's going to be horrible, but maybe I can learn how to edit. But a big thing you need to know about mortgages is something that you have to pay up front. There's some types of mortgages that you don't have to do this, but most lenders will require this. Different word for deposit.
Like 10% down?
Down payment, yeah. So a down payment, it's usually expressed as a percentage. So I know for my loan at M&T, I had to have, I think it was either 3 or 5% down. Like that was a requirement. Like if I couldn't do that, I could not take out the mortgage through them. And I know a lot of reliable lenders have a system like that. I do know though that there is some loans that will offer up 0% down. If you go on and Google mortgages, you could probably get some shady mortgages with $0 down. I just don't know about the reliability of those sources. But on a more reliable note, is anyone in here a veteran? Or have a significant other that's a veteran? No? Well, if you're a veteran, you can get a VA loan that has $0 down. That's one of the things that we do for our veterans in the country. All right, so a down payment is what? Money that you pay in advance. Yep, money that you pay in advance, and it comes off the loan amount, right? So if your house is $150,000 and you pay 10 grand as a down payment, your loan's not going to be for 140, right? So a down payment is a way for them to show that, for you to get some equity in the house basically right away. You know what I mean when I say equity? Equity in the house?
How much it's worth?
Not how much it's worth, but how much of it you own.
Oh.
So, because like when I first bought my house in September, when I first bought my house in September, the bank basically owned majority of it, right? Because I took out my loan through them. Slowly, I am buying my house back from them every monthly payment I make, right? So when I say equity, I mean, how much of the house have you paid for? You know what I mean? Look at how many monthly payments you've made and your down payment. That will tell you how much you've paid into the house, right? So that's your equity. If you hear me refer to equity, it's how much money have you put towards owning this house? That's a real layman's term definition. Like if you Googled equity, it would probably give you a little bit more formal of a definition, but the money that you've actually paid towards the house is a good enough definition for me in this class. And I think it's pretty understandable. I would write down that the equity includes your down payment and then just any monthly payments you've made or optional payments.
So equity includes what?
It's your down payment, because you've already paid for part of the house with a down payment, right? But then it is also like your monthly payments that you've made. It's basically any money you've paid towards the house's value, essentially. Have you ever heard of anyone taking out a home equity loan before? That's where, like, if you have a good amount of equity in your house, meaning you own a good portion of it, you can actually basically take a loan out on that for a decent interest rate. And like a lot of people will do that to make home improvements. Like they want to add a $30,000 addition to their house, but so they just take out a home equity loan to do that and then pay it back. And they're usually pretty decent interest rates. But that's where that term home equity loan comes from, because you're taking out a loan from the equity that you already have built into that house. That's one of the main reasons to buy a house, right? Rent, a lot of people see rent and they think they're just throwing their money away. They're like taking it garbage, right? Where if you're buying a house, you're paying into the house. You own a little bit more. Now you own a little bit more. Now you own a little bit more. So that's what equity is. I just put down payment up here. This is, if you want a formal definition of down payment, that's about as formal as I get. I just like to be in layman's terms for the most part. And yes, note that most loans will make you put a down payment down. It's usually expressed as a percentage. And if you're getting a mortgage for $0 down, I would check the reliability of that source. Do you know what the suggested down payment usually is for a mortgage? It's a percentage higher than 10%, 20%. Now, I'll let anyone share their opinions on this, but the reason why people suggest 20% from my understanding is because there is a fee that you have to pay. You have to pay this fee every single month until you've paid off 20% of your house. So if you put a down payment of 20% down, then you never have to pay the fee. This fee is called private mortgage insurance. It's called PMI. Not every type of loan has you pay PMI, but most of the, like a conventional loan, a basic loan would have you pay that. But that's something you gotta weigh out. PMI is not crazy expensive. So like if you can't afford to put the 20% down, like can you afford to pay the PMI? Probably, it's not that big of a deal. But some people see it as, I'm gonna put the 20% down just so I don't have to spend that unnecessary money. Also, it's nice just to get a pretty big head start. Taking out a loan on 180 grand is different than 160. 150, whatever it ends up working out to be. So just something to think about. And we'll come back to PMI in a second, actually. Is there any other comments on that from those of you, especially who have mortgages with the 20%? Does anyone have any other knowledge on that? No? Okay. That's just a good rule of thumb, but think about it like this too. If you're even just taking out a $100,000 loan for a house, which in Rochester, the average price of a home is about $170,000 something. That might have changed, right, about that. Let's say it was just a $100,000 home, which is less than the average. What's 20% of that? 20% of 100,000 is
20,000.
20,000, right? That's a lot of money to save up for a down payment. That's crazy. Like you need to be planning way, way, way in advance if you want to be able to put a down payment down like that. Something that is very helpful for the bulk of you who have never owned a home is I went through a first-time homebuyers program. I highly recommend doing that. I haven't seen any drawbacks of doing it. But basically, I had to do almost nearly nothing. I had to do like this 6-hour course or something and make deposits into a savings account every month for like a year. And they gave me, I believe it was like $7 grand or something like that towards my down payment. What? I went through M&T. It's called, if you Google first-time homebuyer program, it's definitely something to look into.
I think there's a salary cap for that.
There is a salary cap. And I was like $5 off the salary cap.
And it's a pool.
That's why I bought my house when I did. Is because I knew I was about to eclipse that. So I just pulled the trigger, especially if you have a spouse. I think it might be hard to hit. There's a combined income too. So that's something you do have to consider, is there is a threshold. However, if you can get in under that threshold, it doesn't, I now am over that threshold. I think it's only been like 9 months later. So if you can get in underneath, that's all that matters. If you the next day go over because you get a raise, then you're still in the program and you still got that down payment. I think there is some other asterisks though, like I have to live in my house for 5 years. So that's something you want to consider too.
There's a pool of money too, so like after it's gone, like it takes a while to come back too.
Oh, that makes sense. So what you're saying is they allot this amount of money for everyone. So if all these people come in and do the first time homebuyer program and they run it empty, you then have to wait for the program to kind of refill, per se. So then there might be a couple, like a year or something like that in between.
Couple months, normally they said.
Couple months. Okay, I didn't even know that. They didn't even teach me that. I can't believe it. Hopefully no one from M&T watches this video. They're getting this criticism. But yeah, that's just some things from my experience. Like, why not? If you're gonna get $7,000 towards something, makes sense. I think the city also has programs. I'm not sure. I think the city also has programs maybe by the hospital. Not possible, but something definitely to look into. All right. Oh, some more. This class is going to be mainly terminology, and then the second half will be calculations. So a lot of terminology right now. Do you know what it's called when you officially own the house? You get the keys, you get the garage door opener, you sign your life away over and over again. You know what that time is called?
You close on the house?
Closing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so closing. So closing is the period of time in which that house becomes yours. I'm sure you've heard horror stories about closing. When I say horror stories, I mean it doesn't seem to ever happen on time, which makes planning for moving really hard. Out of the six of us who just got houses in the last 2 years, which is a small sample size, but every single one of us got pushed back on our closing date. So just some food for thought. Those of you in here who have a mortgage, did you get pushed back? Yeah? You got early? What? Is it because you work in the field? They were just like, did you know some secret? Because I had all my ducks in a row, all ready to go, and then I got pushed back a week, and I was so distraught.
That's how it normally goes, though.
Yeah, so I knew it happened, but I was like, it's not going to happen to me. Like, it's going to be okay. And no, it got pushed back a week, which is a pain when you've scheduled a bunch of your friends to come help you move. Yeah. So just learn from that. Or more importantly, someone in my last class was saying how they had paid movers and then had to go and change everything, which they said wasn't a big deal, but they did have to pay a fee, which becomes a little more of a deal. But yeah, that period of time is called closing. Usually you'll schedule a meeting, and it's you as the buyer, and you're there with your attorney, realtor, whoever ends up being there for the seller party. But it's just a meeting basically where you're signing everything over and getting the keys. Then you can finally go there. Okay? So this is a period of time. That's a meeting, right? The next thing I want to talk about is at this meeting, or during this time, there is going to be a lot of fees that you have to pay. Do you know what they're called? Overall. Closing fees, closing costs is usually what they're referred to. So closing costs, there is a whole list of possible closing costs. So I'm going to show you a list, but I want you to understand you might not have to pay all of the things I'm about to show you. It's a case-to-case basis, right? I just want to show you what it can look like. So real estate expert, is Zillow a good site or not? Terrible. Well, they have a list of closing costs. I'm going to use it, so don't judge me.
Just if you're looking for a house, like, is it just because most of the time it's like incorrect or not the most updated information?
Yes. No, I was aware of that, but their actual information, like, I don't know how they could have messed this list up.
No.
So, what fees can you expect at closing? So, these are all fees that you should be prepared to possibly pay at closing. You'll know this in advance. Your realtor will know what fees you're going to have to pay and not have to pay, but just be prepared. So, I'm going to give you a couple of examples, as you probably can't see from there. This is in the PowerPoint, so you'll be able to pull up this link, or do what I did and just Google closing costs. But you have an application fee, an appraisal, which is basically where they come by the house to see what it's worth, right? Attorney fees, closing fees, courier fees, credit report. So for them to run your credit, that costs you money. I think it cost me like $40 or something like that. And they had to run mine twice.
Did you buy something right afterwards?
I did not buy something right because they told me once you buy a house, like when you're in the period of where you're about to close, don't go make any other big purchases, especially on like a credit card, because it's going to alter your finances. It might throw your mortgage process off. So I did not do anything. But there was a very long time between the first time they read my credit report and me closing on the house, so they had to run it again. So I got lucky. I got to pay $80 for it. Yeah. And then some other things. Home inspection. Do you have to get that done?
Yes. Well, depends.
Depends, yeah. So you don't have to get it done. A popular thing that I've seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a popular thing that I've seen, especially right now, is people offering up waives on home inspections to get a house. So right now, it is difficult to get a house for at what you probably think it's valued at. Most houses are going for much more expensive than they're valued at, essentially. So one way for me to really entice you to sell me the house is, hey, you know what? I'm not even gonna get your home inspected. And you're like, you're not even gonna want to know if anything's wrong with it? Sounds good. Because if you're selling it and it gets inspected and there's things wrong with it, the buyer could leave, or that could result in you needing to pay for some of those fixes, right? So the fact that someone's willing to completely waive the inspection, you could have asbestos in there, you could have something going on in there. No one's gonna know. That's enticing as a seller a lot of the time. So you don't have to get it. Should you get one? A lot of mortgages make you, yeah. Mine did not. Mine did not make me, which was weird for a first-time home buyers program. But I did do it. It ended up being like, I think it was like $180 or $200. Yeah, just to give you an idea of what it ends up being. I mean, in my opinion, that's worth it for knowing if you have anything wrong. Also, my realtor was telling me, because I had cold feet, very cold feet, about going through with the process of buying the house. It was a really big commitment. And he was like, if you want to back out, now is your time. You get the inspection, say that you're not happy with the inspection, and you have an out. Obviously, I didn't take that out, but just some food for thought. No, it's very specific. And then if I keep scrolling down, there's tons of stuff on here, but I just want you to know a couple of examples. So a couple of other examples are origination fee, which we're going to end up talking about, which is basically commission for the broker, the mortgage broker, essentially the person dealing with your mortgage. What else is big? PMI is on here, is an example of closing costs. And then you got property taxes, survey fee, underwriting fee, transfer taxes, just so many different possible fees. All you need to take out of that, there's a lot of fees, and know a couple of them. Know a couple of them. In addition to that, a good rule of thumb is expect to pay about 2 to 5% of what the home's valued at as part of closing costs. So if your home is $100,000, expect to pay between 2% and 5% of that, so between $2,000 and $5,000 for closing costs. Are you starting to see how these fees up front can add up? Like, I had been saving forever for a home, and I thought I was going to be very well off. And don't get me wrong, I definitely was in a good spot, but it goes quick when you think of, okay, I have to pay closing costs, which end up being, it could be, $8,000, $7,000, which is a good amount. That was money I was planning on having towards my down payment, but totally forgot to include. But then also, what do you pay at closing that I just said?
Closing fees.
You would do your down payment. So you need to come prepared with the money for your down payment and closing costs, which works out to be thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in most situations. So that's something to consider. All right? Hopefully I'm not ruining your job. Like, I'm talking about how much houses cost.
The market's so crazy.
So this is just some more formalized notes on what we just talked about. The big thing is just make sure you know what closing costs are, know a couple of examples, and know that it ends up being about 2 to 5% of the purchase price of the home. And you'll be good.
You said you're emailing this out, right?
I'm going to
Okay.
tomorrow, yeah. I already have a Siri note reminder for tomorrow to do that. And has anyone heard people, as of late, talk about how crazy the housing market is right now?
Yes.
I don't work in it every day, but I definitely went through this. I was going to open houses back in the summer last year. I would get to the open house like 15 minutes early. There would be like 40 pairs of shoes, and I would literally walk up and just like, and I mean, I really couldn't afford to pay more than what the houses were listed as. So I really had no like upper hand, or what's the word I'm looking for? Not convincing, but I can't think of the word I'm thinking of. It's a very basic word. But I basically had no way to say, hey, give me the house. So I would get to these houses, I would walk through them and say again?
Leverage.
Leverage, no leverage. What'd you say?
Negotiate.
Yeah, I had nothing to negotiate on is exactly the word I was looking for. I'd be going up to $150,000 home, like, okay, that's what I can afford. And then I would hear people talking and the realtors talking like, oh yeah, there's a $170,000 offer on this house. I'm like, all right, let me get my shoes. I'm out. Or I would go talk, like I'd have my realtor who would talk to the other realtors there, or the realtor who's posting the house. And he'd be like, yeah, there's 20 offers in on this house. I'm just like, what are the odds that mine's the one? Very slim. Okay. Get my shoes, walk out. I looked at a lot of houses because I tried to figure out what I liked and what I didn't like, but the market was so crazy. And that's also when you need to think about, like, is it worth it to pay $170,000 for a $150,000 home? That's something you need to evaluate. For me personally, that was not a smart decision. So I did not do that. I looked at about 20 houses. I put an offer in on one of the 20. One.
You got the one you put an offer, the only one?
No.
Oh, you scared me.
No. I did not get that one. I put it in on one and I did not end up getting it.
So you're very lucky.
Yeah, no. But I did get very lucky. So my mathematical brain that is also very stingy. Not stingy, I don't believe in overpaying. I don't believe in overpaying for something. If you had me for 101, you probably heard stories. But yeah, I would do anything to save money at the grocery store, et cetera, except couponing. Never got into that. Definitely a sucker for a good coupon, but not on that level. So I ended up finding, I'm Italian, so family member who I didn't even know was selling a house. My uncle is my realtor, and it was one of his cousins, so it was far away. They were selling their house, and I ended up getting a really good deal on that, which is the only reason I ended up going through with that. After looking at the 20 houses, I actually was ready to call it quits and restart the first-time home buyer program, because I was like, I'm not spending 20 grand over what a house is worth. Because what are the odds that when I go to sell it, I'll get that money back for it? Especially because I wasn't looking for my forever home. I was looking for a house for 5 to 10 years. that I could get a good value on and sell down the road for whatever I paid for it or more. So just some food for thought. What that's called right now is it's called the seller's market. So what a seller's market is if you look at everyone in here, let's say let's say all of you guys, my arms, all of you over here want to buy houses. All of you guys. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And these 3 over here are selling houses. That's not even that dramatic, but it's pretty dramatic. And all of you are trying to buy their houses. Well, what that's going to look like is Josh is going to come up and say, hey, I'll give you an extra 10 grand for your house. This is in written form, obviously, and not this casual. But what Anna's going to do is she's going to field all of your offers. And you know that all of you are putting offers down, so you're going to keep stepping up your game. Whether you might even come up and say, hey, I'll pay you cash, which is a huge incentive, right? So all of you guys are fighting for only 3 homes, which makes it a seller's market. Because these 3 can name their price with you, basically. Because you really need a house, and they know that they have one of the few houses that are up for sale. So on the flip side of things, a buyer's market means that all of you have houses to sell, and there's only 3 buyers. So you're like begging them. You're like, Shannon, come see my house. I'll make you dinner. I don't know what else is enticing. Yeah, no. But you get what I'm saying is you're willing to do anything to have these people come to your house and buy it because there's so many houses for sale and there's only a couple people looking, which would mean it's a buyer's market, which would be a good situation for the buyer, right? So that's just some terminology to know. I'll let you sum up that in your own words, but a buyer versus seller's market. Buyer's market means it's basically good for the buyer. Seller's market means it's good for the seller. In a nutshell. Do you know how long it's been a buyer's market or a seller's market?
About 2 years, they're saying, but it's going to change soon.
It should be changing soon.
Just, I mean, think about it, some more inventory, you know what I mean? More buyers, it's gotta eventually.
Yeah, it usually goes back and forth essentially. It's just a matter of time, right?
And so many people are just buying houses right now that they don't want to be in, so.
Yeah. Because people are like, I just want to buy a house and there's not that many options, like me and living in West Emory have it. Yep.
Houses are selling literally overnight right now.
Yes. Yep. My friend put his house up and sold it within 24 hours.
What? That's crazy.
Mm-hmm. I probably would have waited longer and fielded more offers, but.
Doesn't have one big people.
Yeah, that's very true. I think he just wanted to part ways at that point, which I understand that too. All right, so does that terminology make sense? The terms that we talked about up here, buyer's market, seller's market, does that make sense? Yeah. Is anyone approaching being in the market for a house within the next 5 years?
My boyfriend closes on his house in 3 days.
Oh, hopefully, right? It's gonna happen?
Hopefully.
It's gonna I think once you're within 3 days, I think you're pretty good.
Yeah.
Mine got pushed back a week, 2 weeks before.
It got pushed back a week, but then
It
it got pushed forward to the same date again.
Oh,
So.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So have you seen him go through the process a little bit? Yeah, it really is a lot. One of my bosses is looking for a house right now, and you'll just see him disappear and then come back just every day. He'll email me and be like, sorry, didn't answer any of your questions today. Because that's how crazy it is right now. You need to go find the house and be willing to write an offer then and there. How do you make that? I'm the person who goes to the mall or nowadays goes online and looks at a pair of shoes 8 times before I buy them. I'm like, look at him. Yeah, is that anyone else? Then I'll minimize it. I'll look at it a couple days later. I'm like, I still like them. Okay, minimize. Open them up. Oh, I still like them. I should just buy them. Maybe next time. So buying a house and making that decision in one day was mind blowing. Yeah, it was just. Yeah. Well, I did that because as soon as I agreed to buy my house, I was like, I'm not going to be happy here. I can't believe I did this. The home inspection, I think I'm going to back out.
Yeah.
And then I got the house and then I was like, oh, I love it here. And then 2 weeks later, I was like, looking at my mortgage. I'm like, I'm going to back out. How can I get rid of this? And most of the time I love it. But so when you make a mortgage payment, so you pay X amount of dollars every month, right? What is that payment going towards? There's 4 things for the most part, most of the time. You make a mortgage payment, I give you $1,000 to the bank. They're taking that $1,000 and what is it going towards?
Equity, interest.
So I'm going to say principal or loan amount, but equity, yes. So like the loan amount and interest. What are the other 2 things that are not as obvious?
Property taxes.
Property taxes. What's the last one? That you have to have to own a home. You have
Homeowners
to have it, right?
insurance.
Yeah, homeowners insurance. So those are the 4 things that are part of any payment. Now,
Have,
say again?
have to have it.
You have to have it, right? Insurance. Is that a New York State law? Or is it a
No.
nationwide?
I think it's nationwide. So like my license is reciprocity, so like Pennsylvania, I think, so it's pretty much the East Coast as far as I know.
The East Coast, yeah. It's really not that expensive though. From what I've seen from the research I've done, this colorblind sucks. I think this is this, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is that. So it's such a small portion of your mortgage payment. It usually, from my research, ends up being somewhere like $20 to $30 a month. From what I've seen, I'm talking like the average price home.
130.
Yeah, right around $30. I know mine is, I think, 26 or something a month. So is this little slice a big game changer? Not really. But I do want to preface the fact that tonight, I'm going to show you on Excel how to get your mortgage payment. It's going to be very reminiscent of last class. But when you use Excel, it only covers this portion of the pie. So for example, the first time that I ran PMT on Excel to get my mortgage payment, it came back like $700. This was way before I was looking at, this is way before I actually picked a house. But most people see $700, like when they're working through their own work in this class, they'll do a problem. It's like, oh, this mortgage is only $700. That's less than my rent. A lot of the time that is the situation, but Excel can only account for these 2 pieces, principal and interest. Excel doesn't know how much your insurance company is going to charge you. Excel doesn't know what your property taxes are, right? So those are other things to factor in. That's why I wanted to give you some estimates for these. Like insurance is about $30 a month that you would add on to whatever Excel tells you. Property tax
Good luck.
can be all over the place. I'll give you a few numbers to work with from my experience. So I was looking at houses around the average. I was looking at houses from 130 grand to 190 in that range, a really big range. But all of the houses I was looking at, I kind of calculated the taxes, so I can give you some numbers. I know when I was looking in West Henrietta where I live, taxes on a home there that's between that price range was about $3,500 for the year. So if I take out a calculator to see what that would look like monthly, divided by 12 months, that was about $300 a month just for taxes. That is the lowest end of the spectrum in Rochester. The city is comparable. Oh, it's up here. The city is comparable to West Henrietta, but that's really as low as it gets for that price range in Monroe County that I've seen. I don't know about like some of the smaller towns, but on most of the suburbs. Like for example, I looked in, so that was $3,500 for West Henrietta in the city. I looked at Chilai, it was somewhere like 6 to 7 grand for the year. I looked in Greece, it was about 8 grand, 9 grand for the year. Fairport was like 7 or somewhere around there. So that's something you want to look into when you're getting a house is what are those property taxes going to be? Because you're going to pay those the entire time. Even if you own your house, you still pay your taxes, your property, your school taxes, right? Even if you don't have kids that go to school in your town, you're still going to pay those taxes. So that's something to consider. And that's a quick Google search or just talk to a realtor and they can kind of help guide you in terms of figuring out how much that would be. But definitely let that factor into your decision, into your budgeting. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? So Excel is just going to give us these 2 pieces of the pie. So make sure to add in those other, especially like if you're making a spreadsheet to see how much you can afford to pay for a house. Just because Excel tells you $700, make sure to factor in an extra 30 and an extra, 300, 400, whatever, based on where you want to live. So that adds up kind of quickly. So as we're talking about how much a house costs you, what are the pros to owning your own house? I heard a murmur, but I don't know where it came from. Was the murmur you?
It's a joke. I said your mom can't ground you.
Your mom can't ground you, yes. That is a pretty big perk. Unless she comes to your house and moves in somehow and, I don't know. I was trying to have a witty response there, but then I realized that I've been way too long today. And yeah, you didn't provide me enough content to work off of. You have equity so you can turn around and sell. Yeah, so when you sell your home, you're going to be making a lot of money off it based on what you kind of already put into it, essentially. There's the difference of taking your money and throwing it in the garbage versus taking it and putting it towards owning something. Although it might seem like I think renting is a bad idea because I'm describing renting as putting money in the garbage, there's still pros to that. Don't get me wrong. Part of me some days wishes I was doing that. For example, the last month I've had 2 trees fall in my yard, and I have to clean those up. So, yeah. What's another pro towards owning a house? Besides paying towards owning something. And not being able to get grounded.
You can fix it up the way you want.
You could do anything you want to it, right? That is one of the powers of owning a house. When you're renting, you don't really have that power. And also, if you're renting, don't make that rental property worth more because you're not going to get anything out of that, right? Something definitely to consider.
Isn't it true that like a mortgage is usually less than what you would pay for like apartment rent?
That's kind of what I was talking about. I'll give you a good example. I'm always very open with my finances and how much I'm spending on things and whatever, because I like to give actual numbers and data. I was living off of Park Ave for the last 3 years, and I was spending $500 a month for a pretty good sized apartment. So, am I able to find a mortgage that's $500? No, but I've heard from other people that were spending $1,000 on rent. And at that point, it can get you can probably find a mortgage. You can definitely find a mortgage that's less than that, but you need to remember to factor in those property taxes and insurance. But yeah, a lot of the time you can end up finding a mortgage probably cheaper than your rent, assuming your rent is, $1,000 or so. And that's all things that you can mess around and figure out. I had a spreadsheet that I literally I had $100,000 for a home, and I did every 10 grand, 100,000, 110,000, 120,000, all the way across. And I went and calculated the monthly payment in Excel for each of them, and I added on what I thought these 2 numbers would be. And then you can kind of look at that and be like, okay, which monthly payment can I afford? Look through them, and you might find that if you can find a $120,000 home or $140,000 home, that it might be cheaper than renting. But then you got to factor in too, what do you have to do as a homeowner versus a renter? Improvements, repairs. Improvements and repairs fall on you, so that's something to factor in as well. So like on mine, I was having Excel give me my monthly payment, and then I had 3 numbers afterwards. They that monthly payment, and I was adding in insurance, property tax, those were estimates, like that I just gave you. And then the third one was repairs, because I assumed, putting aside $75 or $100 a month for some sort of repair. And then I looked at those numbers to figure out what made most sense.
The benefit to that is when you pay for your repairs, you get it done the way you want it done, you get it done right, as opposed to having a person who comes in and does just enough to say that
They did
it's
it.
done.
It sounds like you've had negative experiences with renting and having someone come fix something. Is that true? Yeah, we went through the same thing with like broken fridges and stuff like that. That like all of a sudden they're replacing it with one that works just a little bit better and for a couple more days than the other one. So, but yeah, that is a perk. What are the drawbacks to buying a home other than obviously it can be expensive?
It ties you down.
Yes, 100%. It ties you down because if you buy a house and you decide you want to flip it within 2-3 years, well, now you've already put a good amount of money into it that you're not going to get back. First of all, you have barely any equity in the house. You don't really own much of that house at all. And then also, what was that big thing that you paid for in the beginning that you're never going to get back?
The down payment.
Well, the down payment was at least you putting money towards owning the house.
Closing fees.
Closing fees. You just spent $8,000 on closing costs 2 years ago. You're not going to get that $8,000 back. So even if you sold your house for an equal amount, you lost $8,000 on that deal. So that's something to consider, right? Which is exactly what she's saying by locking you down. Say again?
Capital gains tax too.
Yes. I'm not going to get that deep, but yes. So yeah, that's something to consider. And that's why a lot of those first-time homebuyer programs say, like, you have to be here 5 years or set something like that. The exception is obviously if you're buying a house to flip it. Like if you're going and buying a $100,000 home and you do so much to it that it's now worth $150,000, obviously, like, go sell it. Like, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying if you're looking for a place to live for an extended period of time. But yeah, that is what I see as the main advantages and drawbacks. Does anyone have anything else to add to that from their experience or etc.? No? Does that make anyone think of any other questions? Are we pretty good on that? All right. So there's a couple more things I want to talk about, and then we'll take a break. So, I mentioned earlier types of loans. So what I would jot down is there's so many types of loans for mortgages, so many types of mortgages, but I just want you to understand what two of them are, just for the sake of this class, because they're two pretty general ones that are popular. And that's a fixed rate mortgage versus an adjustable rate mortgage. You don't have to write these definitions down exactly as they are, as you're going to see they're pretty simple. Fixed rate mortgage means what? Your interest rate stays the same. So if you start that mortgage with a 4.5% interest rate, you keep that interest rate throughout the length of the loan. You pay 4.5% every year for 30 years or whatever. Versus an adjustable rate mortgage, which is often referred to as an ARM mortgage. Adjustable means
Goes up and down.
it fluctuates. Yeah, it fluctuates with the market. So however the housing market is doing, that's what dictates your interest rate. So it's a little bit more of a risk, depending on how you see this situation. But why they're also enticing is typically you can get a lower interest rate in the beginning with an adjustable rate. Like, so if you choose adjustable rate, maybe they take that average of 4.5% and they're like, hey, we'll start you at 4.25%. So you're getting a little bit lower of a start. The only issue is that going forward with budgeting, it's much harder. Does anyone have a problem? This is my biggest pet peeve, budgeting for like the heat in the winter.
Yeah.
Like, just because you never know exactly what it's going to be, picture that times like 10, because the mortgage, you're just never really going to know, which makes budgeting hard. But could you end up paying less in the long run with an ARM?
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's why a lot of people will go that route. It just makes things a little bit more difficult. In terms of this class, I just want you to know the difference. All of the calculations that we make will be based on a fixed rate. Just because we don't, unfortunately, I wish we could spend weeks and weeks on mortgages, but we don't have that time, so we're just going to keep really basic with fixed rate, which are going to be the most popular. All right. One more thing I want to talk about, then we'll break. Credibility. So your credit score. I felt the need to talk about this, as many of you probably are going to have student loans. So I really wanted to discuss this. So when you go to buy a house, they obviously look at your credit, right? Are we familiar with credit score?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. It's basically a number that is tied to you forever that tells people how trustworthy you are in terms of finances. How trustworthy are you at paying people back, essentially? Higher credit score usually results in you paying less money via interest, right? So this is actually how your credit score is developed. This is the portions that contribute to it. So your payment history, and if it's been on time, you've been making all your payments on time, that's the biggest chunk or contributor to your score. Outstanding debt. So how much money do you owe just in general? Student loan, car loan, mortgage, credit cards, how much do you owe in general? That will affect your credit score. Obviously, you don't want to have too much debt. You need to have a little bit of debt to pay off to improve your credit score, but you don't want to be earning 30 grand a year and have $100,000 in debt. Your credit score is not going to be pretty because it's not going to be likely that you can pay it off. Credit history length. This is exactly why I made my brother, when he was younger, get a credit card at such a young age. I really encourage that, because if he could be smart with it and just maybe put his gas is something he could always pay for. Like, he planned on paying for that every week. So if you just swiped your card and just paid that off each week, if you have self-discipline issues, leave it at home. And then just bring it when you're paying gas, right? Just because the longer that you've had credit, the better your score is going to be, all right? And then credit types used means, are you taking on a variety of credit? Do you have a bunch of different loans? Do you have a credit card? Do you have a couple of credit cards? How many options do you have? Again, there's a sweet spot with that. Then lastly, new credit. So if you all of a sudden need a lot of money and you're taking credit out from all these different places, it's going to hurt your credit score, essentially. So I just wanted you to see where all of that was coming from. And also know that these things are what a mortgage lender is also looking at specifically to determine if you're a good fit. They want to know how much debt you have, et cetera, just because they want the best possible chance to make their money back from you. They don't want to give you a loan with a very high risk of you not paying them back, because then they lose out, right? So why did I bring this up? Why did I feel it was especially important to bring this up is because a lot of you have student loans, yeah? A student loan is a debt, yeah? So that's something you want to think about. If you have other debts as well on top of your student loans, that could end up hindering your ability to get a mortgage, depending on how much your student loans are and what your salary is, et cetera, et cetera. But it's something to start thinking about. Like, if you know you want to take out a mortgage, soon after you're done, after you graduated, maybe think about paying your student loans off even sooner than the 6-month grace period, or just more than your payment so that you have less debt out there. Just something to consider. That's something that I've seen people run into that I always feel a note to share, is that there is a connection between those things. All right, does that all kind of make sense? Is that a lot? I hope it's kind of easy as it's more conversational and less math. But, so right now,